Thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed. I'm interviewing you as an activist, and the focus of this interview is on the statue of Robert Milligan.
Yeah.
So could you start off by just telling me about how you came to be interested in the Milligan statue?
I don't think I really noticed it after it was installed, particularly, until I read an article which appeared in the Islander, and that was kind of very much presenting the Milligan, who I'd not heard of previously, as this kind of father of the Isle of Dogs, and it was then discussing the building of the West Indian merchants who built the dogs, and then basically saying that, recalling that in 1800 the Prime Minister declared a public holiday on the day the foundation was laid. Could this happen again on the island on the 12th of July 2000? I thought this was, it seemed to be quite strange, an article that would celebrate this period in history with the West India docks, basically founded by a consortium of plantation owners who wanted to protect their goods when they arrived in London by putting them in a docks with a wall around it. So, yeah, I thought.
So, when was this?
This was in 1998. So this was, we'd gone through the experience of having the Derek Beacon, the BNP councillor, elected locally in perhaps one of the lowest turnouts in a council by-election. But he did actually manage to get elected. And that was a big shock for people, I think. The fact that he didn't really, getting elected was as much a surprise for him as it was for anybody else, I believe. So he didn't, once he was elected, he didn't really know what to do next. Apart from kind of reproduce the kind of BNP ideology of basically they were a Nazi party.
At the time in 1998, when you heard about the Milligan statue, and when you heard about Milligan,
yeah,
were you living on the Isle of Dogs? What was your relationship with the Isle of Dogs?
I'd been living on the Isle of Dogs for a number of years by then, different places at different times. I moved around on both sides of it. I'd also seen the transformation of the sort of place where the council were very keen to find people to take on council flats because there was a surplus of housing in London at the time. And the kind of centre of the island as a kind of wasteland. And then having seen Canary Wharf being built up since moving there, basically in 1979. So I've been living there for quite a while by that time.
Yeah, so you'd lived there through the whole, all of the many of the changes that were taking place and the election.
Yeah.
But knowing that you literally didn't know that the statue was there, you didn't know anything about it until that Islander article that you referred to.
No.
Yeah. So you said a little bit earlier about what the statue represents. Can you say a little bit more about that, and also how you found out about that beyond what was in the Islander article?
Well, what also struck me is that there's what the statue represents, but its positioning in a particular locality seemed to give it a particular signification, in that it becomes a representation of power. And I think there's another story running us alongside this, and this is the Henry Moore statue of Old Flo, which was given to be put on a council housing estate and is now in pride of place of one of the decorations of Canary Wharf. So it's like the positioning of statues in an urban environment gives whatever that representation is, turns that into a kind of reference point as people move through that space. So in that sense, the representation is linked to precisely reading this this piece in the Islander, which kind of has a particular take on Robert Milligan that actually has been sparked off by the repositioning of the statue.
Right. Yeah. So the statue reaching well beyond its actual placement, but then the placement being a way of spreading those kinds of ideas. You said it much better than me. So I just wanted to just ask you about the Islander and what it is. What was the Islander?
The Islander was I think it was a monthly or quarterly newspaper that was put out by the Association of Island Communities, and it was printed, and it was generally widely available, I would say. And it in many ways, the association, when I subsequently went to a meeting of the Association of Island Communities, I couldn't help getting the feeling that a lot of the people had known each other when they were at primary school.
Right.
Which I is, I'm not knocking it, but that's what somebody's coming in, that's what I felt.
Interesting.
I mean,
so,
I think those sorts of relationships can have a beneficial effect on occasions, but on other occasions they can have a negative impact. And I did feel that reading this was there was like this had been going on, and this was the first that we get to hear of it. Maybe they'd had discussions within the Association of Island Communities. I don't know, but certainly,
yeah. And you hadn't been wandering along the North Quay at that time because there wasn't really anything going on the North Quay at that time.
I used to wander around on the Isle of Dogs. I found that was it certainly helped me think about things by walking around, and then as a way of kind of if I had something to think about, if I did it whilst walking, I found it beneficial, the physical exercise. And then obviously I was coming across a whole range of different views and aspects on the Isle of Dogs, and then looking at maps of things like the Booth maps of seeing where some of the poorest areas from the Charles Booth map were still the poorest areas, a long time later. I can't remember when the maps were done. I think it was done in the 19th century. So there's a whole load of stuff. There's just so much to walk around and to see and do, and all the time the area is changing from this kind of. There used to be a glass walkway that went over the Millwall docks. That you would walk up the steps and then walk across this glass walkway to get to the other side. And that's now been replaced by I think it's a kind of Dutch bridge. It looks like to me anyway, but I think it can lift up. It's, yeah.
So that was kind of your wanderings in sort of the 1990s were, yes, you might have seen it, but you didn't if you hadn't thought about it.
I didn't really notice it. I could have walked by it, and I think that often happens.
Yeah.
That people get so used to something, they walk by it day after day after day, and they don't really. But when you're actually, if you're like wandering and thinking about things, you're more likely to notice things that if you were concentrating on getting to work.
Yes.
You would be perhaps have a whole load of other worries on your head which mean you cut yourself off from noticing such things.
Yeah. And then after you read the article and you kind of began to think about Milligan as a person, and you became aware that there was, I think, Canary Wharf Group and various others were setting themselves up to celebrate the centenary of the Isle of Dogs on 12th of July 2000. Had you by then kind of noticed the statue in situ?
I probably had a look at it as a result of the article. I can't specifically remember the first time I saw it.
So what were your kind of feelings about what was happening in the year 2000 in that space? And if there's any way that you can remember any reference to the Milligan statue at that time, please say.
Well, I did send a response to the Islander in November 1999, and in which I argued that the name the Isle of Dogs goes back to Elizabethan days, and referring also to a play by Thomas Nash and Ben Jonson called The Isle of Dogs, which there is no extant copy of, but this actually establishes the name The Isle of Dogs 200 years previously, and it seemed that this kind of this separation of the building of the docks and the disappearance of that previous history, I thought that was needed an explanation.
Yeah.
And I expressed that I find it offensive that in the discussion of the West Indian merchants, they failed to say that they were slave owners.
Yeah.
I thought that it's like suddenly it all comes into existence at once.
Yeah.
And then indeed start talking about what was happening at that period of time with the revolt particularly in San Domingo. It successfully drove out the French, and you know there's a whole context there which stretches beyond particular interests of this particular country. But then also specifically referring to the significant number of people in this country who did actually push for the abolition of slavery. So the idea to have another toast to the prosperity of the Isle of Dogs seemed to be not really taking on board everything that might mean. And then putting that in the context of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. And I mean, it was around the time I was getting involved with the Black and Asian Studies Association, who were organising a conference about archiving and the Black and Asian people, the experience of Black and Asian people in this country for back through that period of time. So it was kind of linked to that opening up of coordinating different archive material is linked precisely to the activism. The two go hand in hand. So you find something out, you see that this is being completely ignored, and you say, well, if you're going to talk about this, why not talk about the whole story? So it got printed, but there was never any real response to it.
And that was written to, you wrote the letter to the Islander?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
I've got them up in front of me on my they are actually on a website. It just helps me remember what was in them.
Oh wow, because I'm not saying anything, I suddenly got signed out. So I'm still here, but I'm just having to put my password back in again, which is very strange. Okay. So I've got that there. And also you mentioned, I've just got it in front of me, your Virginia article, and you say, yes, it wants to celebrate its bicentenary. So you are very much reacting against the use of the word celebration as well.
Exactly.
In that, yeah. Can you when it actually happened, I think your article was published in 2000, but it must have, obviously you wrote it before the actual
Yes.
centenary
Yeah.
events. Can you remember anything again in those events that referenced the Robert Milligan statue, or where that it would have been, well, can you just remember any reference to it, and if so, or if not, any other kind of points that you might want to raise about that particular event?
I at that event, in the end, the yes, so I've been, one of the things I've been I sent letters to the directors of Canary Wharf, raising a number of concerns with them, and including a copy of the letter I sent to the island and not. Yeah, so I sent that to I found all the directors, and I sent them with copies to a number of councillors as well, and the local MP, Bernie Grant, Tony Blair, and Ted Johns of the Association of Island Communities, and an activist list called the Mayday 2K list. Yeah, I didn't get any reply. However, I did feel that by writing to them and keeping a copy of it,
Yes,
and publishing it, then it would mean that at some future stage they could not say that they were unaware of it, or no attempt had been made to make them aware of it.
yes.
So
yeah, And did you go to have a look at the exhibition at that time?
I'm trying to remember now. I can't.
Don't worry if you can't remember then.
No, I can't remember. I haven't got. I can remember that in the event that what happened was there was a very ill-considered letter that appeared in the magazine produced on Canary Wharf. Just trying to see if I can find that. Yeah. So this was on May the 4th. And it said, talking about they're talking about the question of the issue of the week. Would you birch scum who defiled the cenotaph?
Right.
And one of the people who responded, who identified themselves with Canary Wharf management, said, yes, I am ex-RAF and think that not only should they be birched, but they should be branded on the forehead so people know who they are.
Oh my gosh. That's where was this? So was this in the Docklands News?
Yeah, in the paper called The Wharf.
Oh right, yes.
The weekly paper for Canary Wharf and Docklands on May.
Yes, yeah.
And so I sent a letter in response. I mentioned that branding was a common practice used to deal with runaway slaves. Sometimes it was used anyway. Yet there's no reason to think that it should quench the desire for freedom and justice today any more than it did in slavery time. And there, Scollins' suggestion becomes perhaps a little more sinister when looking at it in light of the Canary Wharf proposed celebration of slavery on July the 12th.
Did they publish it?
Oh yes, it got published.
It did?
Yeah. The paper that the people producing the Wharf were not the same as Canary Wharf people. It was a different organisation.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah. But I did, as soon as it came out, I got a phone call immediately. It's the first time that I got response.
So the phone call from
the Canary Wharf.
Oh, from Canary Wharf.
Yes.
Right.
And I think
they say?
We must talk. And one of the things that led to is that when they had the event on the mud chute, which was the kind of a major area built with the soil from the dock.
Yes.
They made sure that they invited, and I think they went through the mechanism between the British Caribbean islands and their representation for events in this country. I think they went through those bodies, but they actually all had a stall there from all the different West Indian islands.
Right.
So that, I mean, put it this way, to have some event that actually recognises the history and the fact that generally history is full of contradictions, is like a step forward. And by having that event and by having that range of people coming, they had little information about their different islands that they came from. I said,
yeah. I'm just looking through the program. I'm just looking through the program for the event.
Yeah.
Fun day program. I can just see what was happening on the main stage. They haven't really talked about that, but I'll probably find it somewhere in there, and in some of the reports as well that were in East End Life.
Yeah.
At that time. Yeah. So there was a debate in there as well, a kind of discussion about the main gate, the Hibbert Gate.
Yes.
That was very much focused on, rather than focusing on the statue, because that was unveiled at the event.
So there was a gateway with they reconstructed this gateway, which had a ship on the top, which was a representation of a ship called the Hibbert. And George Hibbert was one of the main people involved in the organisation of slavery in Jamaica, and he was also well known for his calls for liberty in England when it came to the relationship of the wealthy to the aristocracy in the monarchy. A strange mixture of authoritarianism and libertarianism, which I think, unfortunately, some people have reacquainted with us in more modern times. So yeah, and I mean that was, I mean again, all of it's having a stimulus from what's going on around you that actually helps you try and better understand how we've ended up where we are, and what would be the best way to try and not destroy the planet. Because the way I see it is, everything today, I see that the people who claim to be responsible for things aren't really being responsible for them at all. And the people who desperately would like to do something, apply the knowledge that they've built up over the years, are often being ignored.
So at that, I'm going to just quickly sort of just go on to 2003.
Okay.
On the centenary year, because that was the opening of the museum, the initial opening. So not the opening of the London Sugar and Slavery, which I want to talk to you a little bit about.
Yeah.
But yeah, the actual opening of the museum. Were you kind of interested, aware at that time?
At that time, I was. I had been working at the St Matthias Old Church, which was on Poplar High Street, which was the Church of the East India Company. And since then, I started working for the council, originally full-time. I tended to avoid working full-time if I possibly can. So but I was from that experience there, I discovered when my sister was visiting that a gravestone right by where we were standing was actually our great grandmother's gravestone. Which kind of
amazing.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
How did you know that?
Well, she'd been doing some family history and she recognised the name Crichton.
Right.
So, and I've been trying to access the archives. When they had the team that was set up had some space in around the back of Poplar High Street. I think it was you got it through. You got there through Cont Street. I can't remember exactly, but I can remember going up and seeing and trying to find out whether one could access the archive or not, and all those sorts of questions. And then it was around that time that the announcement of the funds to develop the museum had come through.
Yeah.
And I was kind of looking forward to being able to access some of the archive. So that was my kind of involvement. I didn't really notice the statue. It was more at the time of when they're doing the London children's slavery preparations for that.
Right, because you were one of the people who was on the consultative group.
Yes.
So how did you get invited? Was that because of was it a particular piece of work that you've been doing?
Well, by that time, yes, part of my reading was focusing on discovering a number of African writers who there was a link in Tower Hamlets with the publication of these 5 writers at the end of the 18th century.
Right.
And rather than dwell on Milligan, when I saw this, people taking some time to get used to the idea that there was a problematic history.
Yeah.
That to actually focus on something positive.
Yes.
And through that, I got to work with the Tower Hamlets African and Caribbean Mental Health Organisation.
Yes, right.
So then we basically from the first, I started off on my own, but after I met Harry Cumberbatch, it became he invited me to work with them on developing the history walk, which over the next few years went through various kind of iterations. Eventually, by 2005, the Hansip co-published the booklet. We had the first edition was done, but thanks to the council paying for the printing of it. So it seemed to me to focus more on. I mean, I found it remarkable that we could create a walk through Tower Hamlets that involved not, it's not 1 or 2, it's actually 5 African writers.
Yes.
Who interacted with the East End. And I thought that was much more interesting.
Yeah.
Discussion to have, and how the East End formed a crossroads of different people, which is why it then became so particular significance, particularly with the people called the Black Tories, who were people who'd fought for the British against the Americans, and had come back to London, but many of whom had become destitute. You had a kind of method of the benefit system of its day meant you had to go back to the parish you came from, which if you came from rural England was one thing, but if you grew up on a plantation that was now taken over by the American revolutionaries, you couldn't very well go back there. So and then the story is how a number of them went to settle in Sierra Leone, which I hadn't understood. There's some vague awareness of it, but I hadn't understood the significance of all of that. And then I became involved in trying to better understand those stories.
And so the stories would be told through the walk.
Yeah.
And were the participants of the walk people from Tower Hamlets, African Caribbean communities, or was it run by Tower Hamlets African Caribbean Communities, or was it both?
It was the Tower Hamlets African Caribbean Mental Health Organisation.
Mental health. Mm-hmm.
And what we did we looked at the material, and then we divided it up so that different people would write different bits. Mm-hmm. So we had so reading through it, you've got the, there's a little bit about somebody selected the material, and then at the end of it there's a little bit of discussion of the different people who contributed to it. So yeah. So
I'm just trying to kind of draw it a little bit back to the questions, because would it therefore be fair to say that when we talk about what do you and others feel about the statue, what else does it concern and in what way? Why does the statue attract, disturb, concern them and you? Are you saying that actually the statue, it was there and you knew it was there, and you weren't reacting just directly to the statue, but all of these histories was not to engage with it, but rather to engage with something which was more positive and which was more challenging of the kinds of histories that were being represented?
Yes, and I would say to that, I was something I came to appreciate later. I can't remember when I think it was around that time, reading Claude McKay's piece about the Yellow Peril and Docklands. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he remarked in this piece, which was published in Workers' Dreadnought, the Sylvia Pankhurst that was published a little bit further north, just by Roman Road, I think it was. And
yes.
So basically what he says the wealth is to be found in the docks, not in the homes of the rich.
Right.
And it seemed that he was referring to access to resources and having people do the work.
Yes.
You need both of those.
Yeah.
And then you've got a dynamic system which generates wealth.
Yeah.
And that is actually by controlling the docks and by controlling the port.
Yeah.
That's of greater significance than pillaging the homes of the wealthy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that to me then started to focus on his involvement precisely with Sylvia Pankhurst and other people he was involved in there, which he describes in his autobiography. I found that very interesting, and then linking that with when we did the Seamen's Conference at the museum, where we had a number of people who had been sailors, particularly with the Harrison Line, which was a company that was recruited in Barbados.
Right.
And so having their memories recounted.
Right.
At the dock where their ship came in.
Yes.
So we were being in the building. Oh, I remembered that there and that.
Yes.
Yeah. Kind of felt that was more important.
Yes, I understand. And would you say that was shared by others in the group?
I would say we all pretty much felt that. I would say. It was like, actually take, you know, the collection of those people's stories, and in the end we had a conference and we had one of the dockers joined us in a discussion of all of that from their memories of that period. That so for like sailors who came from the Caribbean probably first encounter London through the docks.
Yes.
And that's also something that comes across in what Claude McKay. He spent a lot of time in the USA after he left Jamaica. So his account of all of that.
What was, excuse my ignorance, but why was it Yellow Peril?
Because of the Chinese population.
Okay.
In Limehouse,
right,
which at the time was the centre of the Chinese community in London,
right,
and as I understand it anyway. And at the time of the Saxe Roman novels and things like that. Yes.
That's really interesting. So when was the Seamen's Conference?
That was in 2004.
Okay, so it had opened and they must have just about started getting all the criticisms about their Empire Gallery around that time.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
So I guess they were getting criticisms about the gallery, and there was going to be heritage money being made available in the run-up to the abolition of the slave trade bicentenary events. So because you've been in these other events, you've been pretty much involved in various different ways. You agreed to join that consultative group. I've seen your name there. Can you, just going back to the statue, can you remember any discussion about having around the fact that this very much more challenging exhibition was going to be happening inside and the statue was going to continue standing up outside?
I think the main discussion was about shrouding it in black cloth, which I think was what actually happened. And I mean, there were other things which, again, I found more interesting as part of the exhibition. Was that for instance, the transformation of a portrait of George Hibbert, who we mentioned before.
Yeah.
And so that the way that was, this was a painting done 1811, I think it was shortly after or around the time of the Robert Milligan statue was actually made. So we got and I think that in the exhibition they had an adaptation of it, which was of the Robert Wedderburn.
Yes, I remember. I think it's still there.
Yes, and to me, the transformation of that image went a bit further at that time in terms of what was possible, and in terms of that, seeing that image in the way that the way that Hibbert was dressed as a man of power, a man of substance of his time. And then the story of Robert Wedderburn, which at the time I was, a couple of us were doing, 3 of us, I'm trying to remember everybody's name, didn't know the conversation go to this point, we're doing a little reenactment of a speech where we had somebody play Robert Milligan, and then we started off having somebody sweep up moaning. And then he comes along and does a speech and everything like that. So that the whole question of Robert Wedderburn,
yes,
was something we were addressing through these these dramatized readings of his works. When he it was all at the time of the Cato Rebellion, and it seems that he was at the time of the conspirators were accused, he was already in jail, so they couldn't accuse him of it. But maybe I having looked at some of his writings, I think that he would have not been happy to proceed down the road that the conspirators did, which didn't lead anywhere apart from a few of them got hanged because they had been infiltrated. So make of that what you will.
So would you say that your view that the focus really needed to be on opening up people's minds and knowledge to figures such as Wedderburn and contexts such as that he was in, was shared by other people in that group at the time, rather than a focus on the statues outside? We've got to do something about it.
I would think so. I don't. We were more focused on what we were doing, and some of the other bits might come up in conversation from time to time.
Yeah.
But didn't really become part of the focus of the group.
Yeah.
So we were much rather looking at how we could engage with the environment, but at the same time, I think maybe the work that we were doing meant that when later on in the time of the Black Lives Matter, people were far more aware of the significance of Milligan. Right.
Yes. That's a really important point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we contributed to a shift in opinions in general, and I think that by concentrating on the what was put in the Power Writers book, I think that was very important. And
sorry, that was put in which book?
The Power Writers and the Struggle Against Slavery. That was the 2005 book put out by Thacknow.
Oh, right.
It's just A4 format, which is
right.
That was a bit more.
Right. Yeah. I'm just trying to make sure. If I'll send you this, when I send this to you, you'll be able to correct it and make sure that I've got it right. Yeah. So just to go back to that sort of shrouding, I've seen a picture of it. I know that it's now been donated to the archives, swathed in black and tied with black rope. Have you got any memory of how it was decided that was what would be done, and any memory of seeing it?
I don't remember being involved in that discussion, but I remember seeing it.
And do you remember sort of anybody's reactions to it at the time?
I remember there was a discussion about how some people have raised the issue, and because there was no impetus to really deal with the issue or how to resolve the issue by the time the actual the exhibition was opened. This was the compromise.
Right.
With an understanding that the matter would be looked at again later on. And I think one of the aspects of it was that part of the installation involved a plaque which was put up there by the directors of the West India Company.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that that was there with no commentary on it.
Yes.
Yeah. Then yeah. So I think that was.
The plaque, which was you're talking about the sort of original words about the illustrious Robert Milligan. You're saying that there wasn't another plaque that was giving a different alternative story.
Not that I remember. There might have been some curation of it, but
yeah,
I think there might well have been, but I can't remember it.
Yeah, I think I have got no record of anything alternative being put up there.
No, but I think the shrouding of it by using a non-verbal means of communication meant that that's something that everybody could agree on.
Yes.
And so I think that was a very sensible way to deal with the issue at the time. I don't think one necessarily wants to rush and do it.
Yeah. Because there were different views within the group, from the funders, from the directorship of the museum, from the British Waterways and LDDC, all who had some sort of involvement with it.
Exactly. Whereas by doing that, with the proviso that the question would be addressed in the fullness of time, meant that people could focus on actually the rest of the exhibition rather than being bogged down in a discussion of the Milligan statue.
Yes. Are you surprised that it stayed up for so long? After that, I mean, we're talking about 13 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the thing is, again, I would say with the shrouding of it, the very fact that it's covered by a shroud, means that the psychological impact of seeing it is quite different, because you don't actually see it, you see the shroud enveloping. And I think going back to the previous point about the representation and then the significance and how having a statue can enhance a particular view of a locality or a view of the world.
Yeah.
That the shroud was actually very effective in modifying that. A bit like, there's the statue up in Bow with the red hands. Are you familiar with that statue?
Tell me more.
It's about the Bryant and May.
Oh right. Oh yeah. Okay. I haven't seen it. No. So it's about the match women.
Yes. And there's a statue. It might be a statue of Bryant. I can't remember. And activists have been painting the hands red.
Right.
For a number of years, and it gets cleaned off, and then it gets painted on again, and then it gets cleaned off, and then it continues like that. And it's just like, as long as it's there, there's going to be people who want to repaint it.
Yes. Yeah.
But actually, that shows there's a remaining attitude in the community that understands that.
Yeah. In fact, that just reminds me of the point you made earlier about that letter to the wharf back in 2000, and why it was that there was suddenly a letter in there about defiling the cenotaph.
Yes.
Because, I mean, the cenotaph is normally only remembered in November, isn't it? People kind of forget about it for the rest of the time.
Yeah.
So why in May there was suddenly a letter about that? I can't remember what else might have been going on at the time. But do you think it was focused on, it was thinking about particular statues on the Isle of Dogs?
No, I don't. I think they've forgotten all about that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, the whole way the question was posed, it's like an invitation for somebody to go one step further. Oh no,
right.
Birch's too good. It should be branded as well. I mean, it's just like, you know, if you have a shift of a discussion, by taking one position, you enable other people to take a position a little bit further.
Yes.
Out than that.
Yes. Yes.
And I think they were kind of a hostage to fortune.
Yeah.
That sort of game.
Yeah, in that particular case.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, what you were involved in the time and what you were wanting, you and others were wanting to be the focus on, and also your consideration of the fact of that exhibition and all of the work that went into its production.
Yeah.
It did contribute to why people were aware of it later on, and that it was then one of the first ones to be taken down after the Colston statue had been removed. In fact, I mean, it was graffitied. I don't know, were you aware of that when it was being graffitied before it was taken down? Or did you just kind of hear about it when it was removed?
By that time, I was no longer living on the Isle of Dogs. Mm-hmm. So I think the situation is, I think I was aware, but not because I'd seen it directly, but probably saw it on social media or something like that.
Right.
So yeah.
So I'm just looking over this, some of the questions, and sort of taking on board what you said about your involvement with the walks and with the seafarers and the focus that you wanted with the development of the London Sugar and Slavery Gallery. So, and the fact that you wanted a lot more to be remembered and differently than just focusing on the statue. Could you say a little bit more? You've kind of said in answer to the others about the 5 African writers and about Wedderburn, but are there other kind of past events or particular people of the past that you've wanted to remember in the work that you've been doing in that area?
I can't think of anything offhand. I mean,
you've already said those groups. So
I mean, more recently, there's now the whole business with the Rustat Memorial in Jesus College.
Yes.
I find the Church of England, it all went through some ecclesiastical court branch of the law, which most people are unaware of. I certainly didn't really understand how it worked. And the think she master of the college. She's a woman. I don't know if she's still called master or how they handle the nomenclature. Anyway, she was she was trying to organise a rearrangement whereby this monument would be put in a historic area, no longer in the chapel, of this person who wasn't just involved in the slave trade, but actually was a former courtier of King Charles, who was involved in running the Royal African Company.
Right.
And the fact that this company was set up by the king to make money, particularly for the Duke of York, who became James the second, was kind of, oh well, he was a loyal courtier and it wasn't illegal. Well, the king had said it wasn't illegal. I mean, it's just like people who really did not understand the issues involved. Yeah.
I've just Googled that as you were talking. So Tobias Rustat Memorial.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I came across a more curious memorial. No, I wouldn't say necessarily curious is the best word. A memorial which raises different questions, and that is the memorial to Thomas Corker in Falmouth. And what I found interesting is that Thomas Corker, who some local activists raised this issue concerning, actually had a family in Guinea. And the whole way the slave trade was mediated on the coast was often through families established with European men marrying the women of the African aristocracy.
Okay, right.
And through that, they would then have a certain status. So not only did they understand what happened in the slave trade after, what the various European powers were doing, but they also grew up understanding the African culture from their mother's side.
So how do you spell Corker?
It gets spelt in a number of different ways. The way one in relationship to this particular monument is Corker.
Right. Okay.
But the name is also Caulker.
Right.
In other parts of the world.
Right.
Like Africa and in America.
Right.
So one of the things I learned is that using text strings for searches is good, but understanding what other names or other text strings might be used as regards the same person. Yes. There's still a lot of work to be done there. So if you really want to pick up on the connections.
Yeah, that's such an interesting piece of knowledge. I had no idea about those relationships. But I wonder if other people in the whole Cast and Stone group do, because of being based at Exeter University.
Well, I'd be very interesting to find out. I know there's a booklet that was put out by Kate Thomas, and I think there was some discussion going on with the vicar, and then the vicar moved on, and there's a new vicar, and I think they're hoping to deal with it.
Right. Yes. I found it.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That's really interesting.
Well, what I would say, one last thing on that.
Yes.
That one of the Elizabeth Cleveland, who is a descendant of Thomas Corker in America, from some of the family based in Guinea moved over to America, South Carolina, I think they were. But she went to visit the church, and she had a document drawn up establishing the birth of a birth certificate as regards Thomas Corker. As she said, well, look, he's one of my ancestors I want to have. And he, in her book, I haven't got it to hand, I'm afraid, at the moment. I can tell you the title later on. But she goes there and she gets this documentation, and I think it was sometime in the 80s or 90s when she was researching her book. And in all the discussion, the fact that there's descendants of Corker in both Guinea and in South Carolina, I don't know if that's really that they've been involved in the discussion or not.
Well, that's really interesting for another day.
Yeah.
But for contextualization as well of what you could be interested in. So I've just realised that it's 23 minutes past 3 and the time has kind of zoomed past.
Yes.
I wanted to get on to some of the sort of further questions, which is really around. I suppose there's not much to be said about barriers that you might have faced in wanting to get the statue removed or something, because you made the decision that wasn't the main that's not the main focus of your energies, that it's but nonetheless the energies that you put into the museum work did contribute to it. But maybe that question's if there is anything that you would say about barriers, because maybe if you hadn't been so aware of the type of barriers that there are that prevent a statue just being taken down, that you might have thought differently about it. I mean, did you think that it's not worth really spending time, because you would have to spend too much time if you really wanted to have it taken down, or wasn't it that important to you?
I think maybe the statue itself is one thing. The power that it signifies is something else. And I think that by focusing on what we focused, that meant that the statues moved. There's sufficient documentation there that anyone who in the museum and looks at it from the various angles, it was starting to see that the arguments which had been developed in defence of Colston, they were going to have a lot of problems with. And they couldn't really just reproduce those arguments. So they thought, well, why don't we take it down? Otherwise, they might discover that what happened with Colston might happen to that statue. They'd have to keep it under constant surveillance, and then where's all that going to go?
But sort of back in the sort of when you were doing the consultative work and wanting to raise issues such as those of Wedderburn, were you sort of made aware of the fact that the statue didn't belong to the museum, that it was on British Waterways land, that they couldn't do anything about it anyway?
I don't know. Maybe they did, and that's why we didn't want. Maybe if they said that, then we would. It's quite easy to tell if when you're having a discussion with people kind of see some hope at the end of the, that we might get somewhere.
Yes.
So in terms of saying you've only got so much energy, where is the best place to spend it? And if they say, oh, well, you've got to go through these people and these people and these people, you think, wouldn't it be much better if a museum paid worker did it than me?
Yes. Yes. So just to get a frank view from you, in an ideal world, what would happen to the Milligan statue? So it was taken down. It was then handed by what's now the Canal and Rivers Trust, which took over from British Waterways. It was their property, and they then donated it to the museum. What do you think should happen to it now?
Well, I thought about this, and it reminded me a bit of the bringing down of the Vendôme column in Paris.
Right.
The painter Courbet's role in that, and so I read a discussion that this was from Asger Jorn, the Danish artist, more than an artist, and he distinguished between he saw 3 levels of vandalism going in establishing the Vendôme column. The Vendôme refers to the Vandals, i.e. it was a town built by the Vandals. So the whole question of vandalism is already in the nature of the Vendôme column. Then it says, first of all, Napoleon vandalised it by having it erected with himself on the top.
Right.
It's this great leader. And then Courbet, who was advocating at the time of the Paris Commune that it should be brought down. Well, he wanted it brought down, and he got the communards to do it. And the communards did it on the basis that they could melt it down and create cannonballs with it, with which to defend themselves.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought. I didn't come up with
make some cannonballs.
Send them back in time to the Paris Commune. I don't know. I mean, that's what I thought in response.
Yeah.
I didn't come up with anything conclusive, and I'm not sure if.
Yeah. I think that's a very valid response.
Yeah.
So finally, another kind of quite broad question is around this idea of heritage. And why is heritage, or it may or may not be important. I know different definitions of what heritage can be to different people, but yeah, what's your idea, and why may it or may it not be important to you or anyone else?
I very much influenced by notions of psychogeography, i.e. that as you move through an area, you're influenced by the built environment, you're influenced by the accompanying statues, you're influenced by the architecture. And certainly the idea that heritage is one particular element of that can be seen as relating to the past in particular, or is it, or there's certain ambiguity there. To what extent is it based in the past? In what extent is it projecting in the future? So so really, the more I think about it, the more I change my mind on that. But I find the thinking about it, that is what is interesting, because by thinking about it, it helps me better understand what the different elements around me, generally called heritage, what they actually signify and what they can mean. And so since living in Ipswich, looking at a lot of the wooden carvings, that's of which I never realized how many wooden carvings from the kind of late medieval period through to, you know, and a lot of the hammer beam roofs in the churches and everything like that.
Yes.
There's a lot going on there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's really, I just think that by having these things we can go and physically interact with, look at directly, walk through, walk inside, walk around and everything like that. A lot of that is regarded as heritage, but I see it as something actually that is existing in the real world around us, and that it's
yes.
That it's actually to have a creative interaction with that, which can best be done in relationship to other people and listening to what they've got to say, and listening to the, you know, they bring extra bits to the discussion.
Yeah,
that's what I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Leutha. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. And is there anything else that you wanted to say, because you said at the beginning that this has kind of led you to think more around public memorials? I mean, you said a bit about the wooden statues around where you are. Is there anything else generally about public memorials that you wanted to say more on?
Well, something I learned to do was take time, and particularly now that I've retired, I've got less pressures to go out and work, as they call it. Just really to you know, the opportunity to just go around and look at stuff and find out a little bit more. There's so much available on the internet now.
Yes.
And one of the things that throughout that period was I did a spell at the National Archive on a Moving Here project.
Yes.
And that was back in 2003, 2004, and that was all linked in with the conference we had with the seamen. But it's like most of that stuff, you know, oral history recordings I made is not. It's probably buried somewhere, but it's not online available anymore.
Yeah.
And around that same time, I started contributing to Wikipedia.
Right.
And the stuff that I contributed to Wikipedia has changed, but pretty much most of it's all there.
Right.
So it's like, I think really, I then started to think about what I like about Wikipedia and how that opens up opportunities for a collaborative process of sharing histories, at the same time as recognizing that it also, due to different imbalances in society, in who has access to the internet, who has free time to do such activity, that it reflects a lot of the biases in general society, but that the fact that there's an awareness of this, that it's possible to do something about it, even if it's one can't expect to resolve any account of the world that is around us is going to have these biases in.
Yeah.
Because it's a reflection of the world. But by better understanding those biases, we can better understand how to remove the causes of those biases.
And is this something that you're continuing to do?
Yes, and it also led me to continue certain inquiries as to how how in terms of computer technology and the internet, these things can be constructed in a way that generally preserves transparency, not internet, but also with a certain amount of clarity, and that enables some long-term process. And the very fact that it's now become, when I started with a handful of people putting up various things, but how it's I feel more confident that material on Wikipedia and the related commons site and other sites like that will still be around and generally accessible, certainly for the time being.
Yes.
And that is the lesson that I've learned, comparing that to people like the National Archive, who I was surprised, but I feel that the political pressures under them mean that they are less likely to continue public access to various projects which they get funded for.
Right. Which ties up very nicely with your idea of what heritage can be.
Yes.
No, that's really really inspiring to know that that Wikipedia can work in that way.
Yes, I mean it has various activists. I think some of them involved in the Cast in Stone project. There's various people doing things. I think the Who's Knowledge, is that the group that's involved with that?
Could be, yeah. Well, I won't mention names.
No, but that I think is important way forward. That actually, it's not just Wikipedia itself; it's the opportunities if people step forward and take them. And which I think you'll probably learn. One of my other reflections on academia is too often it seems to be a bit like a kind of set up to establish people's credentials to join the civil service or some other corporate whatever, right? I think there's a lot of people in academia resisting that, but I think they often find it harder and harder to do so. So I think it actually finds ways for people to connect up, which might suffice any problems that arise in that area in the not too distant future.
Yeah. So should we stop recording now?
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna stop recording.